So, dear respected Thai, dear community, so thank you for coming. I know it's nap time right now, but we have a special event, and I just checked with the video team. Is it okay? Okay, great. Are we good? Excellent. Thank you, Brother Mindin. So, welcome to a very special event. So, we're very honored today to welcome Masako White, who well, we'll get into her story, I think, in the next hour, but who worked with Thai and Suko Chang Khong, who at that time was known as Phung, Chi Phung, in the School of Youth for Social Service in Vietnam in 1967, 68, and 69.
Yes, I was there
From 66, okay. Okay, great. Yeah, so I told the story to a few people. We were researching Thai's biography. So first of all, I'm Brother Stream, Brother Phap Luu. I mean, you all know me here, but I just say for the video. And today is the 25th of July in 2024, and we're at Deer Park Monastery. And we were researching Thai's biography. So many of us have not had a chance to read that. It's in Vietnamese right now. So it was published about 100 days in the 100-day ceremony after Thai's passing in 2022 in Vietnam. And I think Sister Kin Nim started translating it, and then I also have in Sister Shan Duk, one of our elder sisters, and we're just completing that translation, and hopefully it will be available soon. We're not sure how, but hopefully it will be. And so actually it was through the process of checking the facts throughout the biography that we discovered Masako. So we some of you may know Jasdeep Kaur, who stayed here a few years ago. So she's an expert in library science, and she wishes she could be here right now, but she's in Magnolia Grove in Mississippi, one of our other monasteries. But she will watch the recording later. But thanks to her researcher's mind, she found an archive at Swarthmore College of the Fellowship of Reconciliation, which is the group that led by the Executive Secretary Alfred Hassler in 1966, 67, that brought Thai around the world, really, around the US and around the world, to speak about the situation of the war in Vietnam. And especially about that there's a third force, right, a third movement for peace, that the Vietnamese people really want peace, that they don't want to, they're not for the American-backed South, they're not for the communist-backed North, but they want peace in the country. And so Thai was speaking, and then eventually the Fellowship of Reconciliation brought those talks together into a book, which is Lotus in a Sea of Vietnam, Lotus in a Sea of Fire. And so we were looking through these archives, and we saw that there were a number of letters between Alfred Hassler and Bao Nguyen, and then of course we knew that was Thai's lay name, Thai's lay name on his passport. So then I told Jasdeep, please, get the scans of those letters, and then what we found was many letters probably that no one has seen since Alfred read them, which were in boxes in Swarthmore, written by hand by Thai. And so I was reading through those, and I gave it to some of the Brother Nhat Hung and Brother Mindin, who are studying to receive the 14 mindfulness trainings of the Order of Interbeing. And so we were reading through those letters, and in one of them in 1968, Thai is in Hong Kong, and he mentions that they had bought a photocopier, a 3M photocopier in Hong Kong, and that Masako was bringing it to Saigon for the School of Youth for Social Service. And so I said, who is Masako? And so that question led to this moment that Masako is here. So I asked the attendant of Sister Chan Khong, and then Sister Chan Khong said, "Oh, Masako!" And it turns out Masako just told me that she hasn't seen Suko Chan Khong, or Phung, as she was known at that time, since 1969 in Saigon. Yeah, so so Suko Chan Khong also didn't know where Masako was, and so it was actually thanks to Brother Nhat, who was also in the class with us, that he got on the internet and he found out that Masako was teaching Japanese at a school in Brea. And so then we thought, wow, she must be somewhere nearby. And then anyway, slowly there was an interchange with the Sangha member that I've known for a long time, David Arund, who is married to Carolyn, who you knew very well. Yeah. Was one of the volunteers, yeah. And so then I reached, because I know David for more than 20 years, I reached out to him and I said, "Can you put me in contact with Masako?" And so that's how we got in contact 2 weeks ago. So that's a little bit of the backstory to this. And so what we've done is we've come up with a list of questions, and they're based on the research that we've done for the book. And actually, originally I just planned to interview Masako on Zoom, but I was very happy because she offered to come here to Deer Park. And then and then when I told some others, they said, "Oh, we want to come too." So we said, let's do something, an optional event in the afternoon, and open it to everyone. And so in our tradition, we start with 3 sounds of the bell. So we'll just enjoy our breathing and listen to 3 sounds of the bell, and then begin.
Well, I am very honored to be here today, and it was a good opportunity to reflect on my experiences in Vietnam, which is really since 66, 67, 68, and 69. So, and then during 69 and 70, I did go on a speaking tour to speak against the war in Vietnam. sponsored by the Fellowship of Reconciliation. So it has been a big part of my life. Although, of course, life goes on, so I have lived my life fully and enjoyed every moment of it. But, of course, my years in Vietnam have been very influential and deep in my heart. So. Oh, thank you so much. I'll have some, as I said.
So the first question that we had was, how did you get involved with the voluntary international service assignments of the American Friends Service Committee?
Right. So my mother was worked for the American Friends Service Committee in Tokyo, and both my parents became Quakers. Right after the Second World War, when they were very, very impressed with the Quakers and how they dealt with the hardships of World War II. And when they came out of the camps that the Japanese military had put them in, instead of being bitter, they were emaciated, but instead of being bitter about it, they immediately turned around and said, who are the suffering people right now? And the people who are suffering are actually the Japanese, who had lost the war and now in turn were being put into camps by the Chinese government and the Chinese military. So they immediately set up soup kitchens and things like that. So that wonderful spirituality impressed my parents so much that they themselves became Quakers and brought us up as children. They never forced us to become Quakers, but we went to meeting, and the spiritual aspect of it, I'm sure, influenced me a great deal. Also, when my father eventually after we came back from China, my father eventually passed away. But my mother was helped by the Quakers, who gave her work to do at the American Friends Service Committee. And so she started working there, first as a secretary, and then slowly was given more and more responsibilities for international seminars, international work camps with college students, and things like that. So as I was growing up, of course, the Quaker influence was very strong on me. And when I was in high school, there were high school work camps sponsored by the Quakers. So I was very active in the work camps there. After college, the 4 years of college, of course, were wonderful years. But
you went to Bryn Mawr
I went
in the US.
to Bryn Mawr College.
Were you in high school in the US or in Tokyo?
No. I was at the Friends Girls' School, which is a Quaker school in Tokyo, and it's all Japanese, but graduated junior high and high school there. And my parents said, once you've graduated, you can choose whatever college you want to go to. And I was fortunate enough to get a scholarship from Bryn Mawr College. And so I was there for 4 years. After college, there were many experiences there. Chief of my experience there, this was from 62 to 66. So in 64, of course, there was the movement for voter registration and things like that. And I had an opportunity to go to Mississippi when I was in my sophomore year. And that was a very, very influential week in Mississippi. I have, even after 3 years in Vietnam, experiencing the war and the, the grenades and the bullets and bombings and things like that, I would say that the most frightened I ever was in Mississippi, because it's the hatred in people's eyes that are much more scary than bombs of any sort, really. So that was very influential for me and moved me a great deal.
So you participated in the Freedom Riders, or is it around that time?
No, I was there for a week with an exchange from Bryn Mawr and Haverford to Tougaloo College in Jackson, Mississippi, and learned about the voter registration drive for the summer of '64, which was the biggest movement with Martin Luther King and everybody. And I was really anxious to participate in that, but the American couple who sponsored me, you have to have a sponsor when you are here as a student, especially a foreign student. They said, absolutely no. We are responsible for your mother, and it's just too dangerous, and if you lose your life or limb or anything, we are responsible, so absolutely not. I was very, very angry, I have to say, for not being able to go, but in retrospect, I understand where they were coming from. So I was not able to go to Mississippi that summer. But all of those experiences made me realize that after I graduated college, because I'm bilingual and because I have, relatives in Japan who are very well-to-do, influential, I knew that if I went back to Japan, I could live a very comfortable life, work in the corporate world and, just do whatever and make a lot of money. And that just was not what I wanted to do. And so I was wondering what I really, really should do, pondering that summer. And then I was staying with the Dudley and Grace Pruitt, who were my sponsors. And they were, of course, Quakers who had worked with my mother in Tokyo, and they were still working for the American Friends Service Committee in Philadelphia, and their home was in the outskirts of Philadelphia. So one evening when I was having dinner with them, Dudley Pruitt said, oh, by the way, AFSC is starting a new program called the Visa Program, the Voluntary International Service Assignments. Up till then, they had had the program in the rural areas of southern U.S., in the poverty-stricken areas and things like that, but they were thinking of sending some volunteers to Vietnam because of the movement of the war, against the war in Vietnam. So I immediately said, well, is this for Americans only? I'm a Japanese citizen. Will they accept a Japanese volunteer? And Dudley said, well, I don't think they've even thought about that. So let me call. And so he immediately, in the middle of dinner, called the person who was in charge of starting the program and came back and said he was also, didn't even think about non-American. And said, why not? So the next day, I went in with Dudley Pruitt to the AFSC headquarters, and I was waiting in the outer room to speak to the person who was in charge, and out of one of the offices came a person called Esther Rhodes. She was a long-time activist in Japan, spoke fluent Japanese, very tall, you know, very imposing person, wonderful person. But she knew me. She had also been a principal of the French Girls' School in Japan, which was key to having us, you know, go to the school. So she came. I hadn't seen her since freshman year, but she came out of the office and said, "Masako, what are you doing here?" So I said, "Well, I heard about the visa program, and am very interested in it." And she said, "Oh." And she walked into the office of the person who was going to interview me, and the door was open, and she said, "Well, Masako Yamanouchi is out there, you know, waiting to see you, but I cannot think of anybody better to be a volunteer." So it was very kind of her to do that, because I hadn't had a chance to, you know, this is long distance. And at that time, you know, we didn't have the means to call parents, or we didn't have phones or things like that. So I hadn't spoke to my mother in ages, and so didn't have a chance to talk to her or, you know, consult with her or anything. So Esther Rhodes was the one who was like, you know, confirmed for me that I was doing the right thing. So I was accepted to the program, and you know, that's how I ended up in Vietnam. So very lucky, very lucky.
So tell us a little bit about the trip over. So how did you get connected to the SYSS?
Yes, so by the time I did go home to Japan for a month, because, you know, I hadn't been home in years. And so I was home for a month. And so by the time I got to Vietnam, there were 3 other volunteers. So 4 of us altogether were accepted. 3 of them were already ahead of me. They had arrived in Vietnam, and they had already set up the language program so that they could learn the language for 3 months. And so by the time I joined them, they were already there for a month. And the visa program is set up so that as volunteers, we each separate to whatever organization we feel attracted to, who are doing social service work. And all 3 of them immediately told me, "Oh, you know, all of us would love to serve with the School of Youth for Social Service. That is the school that has the philosophy very similar to the Quakers. We would love to do it, but because they are outside of Saigon in the rural area, we've been told that none of us as Caucasians could go there, because the school could not risk being seen to be cooperating with a Caucasian who the villagers might interpret as American military." So they said, "You know, as much as we know that your intentions are good, we cannot even invite you to come and visit the school." So when I went there, they said, "Masako, because you're Asian, you know, you might be able to go and visit them at least, you know." And so Ji Feng and 2 others from the leadership group came again and visited with us. And when they saw me, Ji Feng immediately said, "Oh, you know, we can invite you to come and visit our school." And so, you know, I felt terrible for the other 3, but very lucky that, you know, I could go and visit the school. And of course, you know, after seeing the school, I thought, "Oh, this is really the place I would love to work at." But Ji Feng said, "You know, we cannot accept you as a worker here, because even our students have to, you know, they're Vietnamese, but they have to go for months of training to shed their city ways. And, you know, when we go to the villages, they cannot be acting in a way that they are from the city and, you know, and not know the ways of the countryside. So you being a foreigner, how can you, come and assume that you can just go into, and of course that mortified me. I felt, oh yes, that's true. How, it made me realize, and all of us as visa volunteers realized that yes, Jifeng was very right. We need to be much more humble. We need to learn much more about Vietnam before we can even do anything positive. But Jifeng was very kind and said, but you can come and visit us any time you want to. And so she was the one really who invited me, let me stay overnight. My visits became longer, and then sometimes because I had a little old French mobilette that I would ride, to the outskirts, they would send messages back with me so I could carry, when she was busy, I could carry, a letter or whatever to the head of the temples or whatever. So gradually, I think she just led me into the work that they were doing, not to go out into the villages yet, but just being useful. And that really is how, after about 3 months, we were having dinner at the school, and Jifeng looks at me and says, you know that you're one of us now, don't you? So it was her way of, saying, leading me in instead of our going in and saying, we can do this. And so I feel very, very grateful that I was able to do that. And so, yes, they gave me a room there. I still had a room in Saigon. And I was also helping out our unit director because he was American and, needed help. So, being useful as much as I could everywhere was the way to do it. So not a very clear-cut job title or anything, but, I was able to be. And when somebody said, what is your assessment of your life in Vietnam? And I look back on it, and I feel very grateful because I learned so much more than I could ever give. But my assessment is I was one more warm body there, and I could provide laughter because I would butcher the Vietnamese language, and the students would just laugh with me. They would say something and say this, and I would say it, and then they would laugh, because they probably had me swearing or something. But so I provided a lot of laughter, I think, and then I was just one more warm body to be there, to be, and in a situation like that, one more warm body is a strength, I think. Yes.
I think for those of us who've worked with Suka Changkong, Jifeng, it sounds very familiar.
Yeah.
You just show up and say, who are you? And then after a while, okay, you're one of us.
Yes. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I think you've already gone into it a bit, but describe a bit the contacts you made in Vietnam and how did you make so you already described how you got in touch with the SYSS. Mm-hmm. So how did you learn Vietnamese? It's just through being in the community?
So we did have a 3-month period where we had tutors. So all 4 of us had 4 tutors, and we were rotating the tutors so that we could, learn from them and practice and things like that. Yes. So.
So what kind of issues came up for you while you were there, whether personal or connected to your experience in Mississippi and doing peace work as a Quaker? Did you find, you struggled or the difficulties?
No, I don't think I ever felt any difficulties. I just was very impressed with, because, well, of course I had heard about Thich Nhat Hanh through all of them, and how he couldn't come back after speaking out against the war. But then Thai Tan Van, who was the head of the school, was very, very, he was young, but so peaceful. He was strong, but not, this kind of strong. He was just strong as a person. The strength emanated from him, and I especially remember when after the Tet Offensive, and actually not many Americans know about this, but after the Tet Offensive, there was a May Offensive in Saigon, in Saigon, the Saigon area. So both times, at a certain point when things, about the second, third or fourth day, some American tanks would roll in. Well, we called them the National Liberation Front. The Americans called them Viet Cong, but they were all around. And they, in fact, at one point during the conflict, the Viet Cong came in one night. We heard the footsteps, running footsteps, and the young monks went out to see what was going on, and they discovered that because we were not very far from Tan Son Nhat, the airport, they were trying to set up some mortars to fire at the airport. And the students said, please, this is a refugee area, we're so close to the village. If you set your mortars up here, we will be bombed for sure by the Americans. And so, the Viet Cong heard that, and they said to each other, oh, this is a refugee area, camp, and so we should not set it up. And they immediately moved and went much further away. That spared the school. And then the Americans would roll in, and there was a walkway, a distance to the main gate of the school, and I just remember Thai Tan Van going, walking, and I was walking a few steps, and of course all of us were following him, but he was just so calm to go and meet the Americans, and then the American soldiers were on tanks way up high, and they were saying things to him, and so he would turn to me, and so I would translate, and then it turned out that the Americans had heard that ours was a refugee camp, and they said, would you like some medicine? We have some captured medicine, and they were, handed us medicine and bags of medicine and things like that. Well, it turned out to be, medicine from North Vietnam, and the Viet Cong had medicine. So Thai Tan Van, accepted very graciously, and then the tanks rolled away. But then he said, well, we have to destroy this right away, because the next American group that comes will see us with this and say, well, you must be with the Viet Cong, So we had to, but he was so wise, in knowing that he couldn't say, oh no, we can't accept this. He accepted very graciously, but then told us we had to destroy it. So he was very, very wise that way. Mm-hmm.
Did you know Nhat Chi Mai?
Oh yes, Nhat Chi Mai was one of the leadership group members. I knew that she was not as, Chi Feng, of course, was very, very much the leader. And I think there were about 4 or 5 of them, and Nyachimai was one of them. And every Friday evening, I think the group would get together, and they would have their meetings, and they would have their brown robes on and things like that. But Nyachimai was older than us, I think by about 10 years or so, older than Jifeng or any of them, and just like an older sister, you know. She treated me like a younger sister. And yes, the night before her immolation, well, that week she had invited all of us, including the leadership and the students of the school, to the pagoda, where the nunnery really, where she was going to pray. I didn't know anything. I don't know whether the leadership knew. I have no idea what. But she invited apparently everybody. And so one of the students, Jinga, and I went and then saw Nga, one of the students there. Oh, she had been injured by the grenade attack. Nga. And Nga had, not very seriously, but I think she was recuperating at the nunnery. So she was already there. And I went there, but none of the other leadership group members were there, including Jifeng. None of them were there. And Jimai, we had a supper together. She invited us, Nga and me, to go and pray with her. And then after the prayer, about 9 o'clock, we were all in this common room, and she was brushing my hair and joking, and she told some jokes. I didn't understand exactly, but everybody laughed, and she was smiling and laughing, and so it was a really lovely, warm time with her that evening. And then we retired. Nga and I went to the dormitory, and Jimai also was there in the dormitory. But then in the middle of the night, I had to go to the bathroom. And when I went to the bathroom, I saw Jimai with her robe and going into the prayer hall. So I knew that she was, going to pray. And but I didn't know anything. Early in the morning, again, I woke up early and saw her again coming out of the prayer hall. And but she was definitely in a prayerful mood. So I did not interrupt her or anything. Didn't greet her. Or anything. And then about 6 o'clock, Nga woke up and said, let's go and get some breakfast and bring it back for everybody. So we went out, and the nunnery was in a fairly busy area. I can't remember whether it was Jelung or... Anyway, it was quite busy, especially in the morning it was busy. And we had gone out, and Nga had a pail, and we filled it with, breakfast things that we bought. And we were walking back, and the first landing was higher up, and there were 2 stairwells that led up to the landing. And as we went close, Nga and I were talking, and then as we went close, some of the nuns on the stairwell called out to Nga and said something, and then so Nga immediately started running forward. And at that point, although I had been learning Vietnamese and doing my best to understand, I have to say, there was some kind of panic mode, I think, because all my Vietnamese I couldn't understand a word that was being said. I just knew that there was something going on. So I ran after Nga, and we went up the stairs and really just saw Jimai after she had fallen forward and definitely had passed. But it was a time of I just don't have words to describe how it was, but there was a lot of commotion around. People were talking, and then somebody came to me and Nga with papers, and they said, these are papers that Jimai had left for the leadership and for Thai Tanvan, and you need to take it to the school, to Phung and to the school. So Nga said, yes, we have to go, we have to leave. So we did some prayers, and then we left. And I was riding, this is an old mobilette, and I had never had a passenger sitting behind me, but I think the adrenaline kept me going, and I rode with her on the back, and then we went first to Phung's house, and Phung came out, and immediately said, took all the papers and said, all right, I'll get this to all the, necessary people. You just go on to the school. So then we took the rest of the papers to the school and rode all the way to the school. And I just remember when I arrived there, the students came to greet us, and I remember Nga getting off, and I got off, and then my legs just were shaking so much that I could hardly stand. It was, but that was the day that Jimai. But all I can remember is how kind she was, very much like an older sister to me, very kind, brushing my hair and, speaking kindly to me. So.
Maybe we can listen to a song of the bell. Thank you. Just to come back to our breathing. So thank you so much for sharing that story. Yeah, I know that when Thai heard about Chimai's immolation, it very deeply affected him. Mm-hmm. And yes. One of the things that we, many of us discovered for the first time was that which was published in Thai's biography, was that when Thai was at Columbia, right after Thich Wan Duc had immolated himself, that Thai actually planned to immolate himself. Oh. And Thai didn't tell anyone. Oh. And it was actually a professor that he'd been studying with in Columbia who, at that moment, just a few days before he planned to undertake this act in New York City, who actually asked him a question like, and told Thai that it's so precious that you are here to be a voice for those who can't speak. Mm-hmm. And he put his hand on Thai's shoulder, and Thai felt like a whole shock go through his body. Mm. because he realized he couldn't say what his plans were. And that kindness from that professor had a powerful effect on Thich. And Thich walked from Columbia down to 109th Street in Manhattan, and then Thich abandoned his idea of immolating himself. This was in 1963. And so most of us students, we didn't even know about that. Thich didn't ever talk about it, as far as I know. He wrote it in memoirs, which he kept in the Hermitage in Plum Village. And so it was only, the public only found out about it 2 years ago when it was published in Vietnamese. And so, but it certainly helped me to understand how Thich could explain so eloquently to Martin Luther King and others in the West why Venerable Thich Van Duc immolated himself. It's because Thich also had gone through that process internally. And so thank you so much for sharing that story. So I think you've touched on it already, but I guess we're very curious how the emotional experience of working at the SYSS, because there was not only witnessing, Nhat pass away, but also the grenade that was thrown in the girls' dormitory, and one of the girls having to go to Japan to have her leg amputated, and then also you were with the school when the 5 were brought to the riverbank and shot.
Yes.
So these experiences are very powerful, and I'd like you just sort of, if you could share a little bit about how that impacted you and what effect it had on your life.
Yes, the students of the school and the philosophy of the school of love, really the teachings of Thich Nhat Hanh, and love above all, to go and serve the people. And I think that was so powerful that the existence of the school, the villages trusted the students and the school. And because of that, the government of Saigon felt that the school was a threat because they could not control the students, and they could not control how the villagers felt about the school and their respect for the school and the students, and the influence that the students had in the villages as they worked. And then the Liberation Front, or the Viet Cong, also were trying to work in the villages and gain the trust of the villagers, but felt that the school was in competition with them. And so I think the school was caught in the middle, being the target of competition, because it was so powerful in its message of love and just service, and the villagers trusting them so much. So I think that's where but especially the government forces felt threatened by them. And so we don't know, to this day, I mean, we could never say, oh, this was done by the government, although we highly suspect it was the government forces that threw the grenades, the South Vietnamese government, yes, through soldiers throwing the grenades at the school and abducting the students and killing them. I don't think that they believe it was the Viet Cong that did it. So, of course, nobody knew for sure, but I was at the school about an hour before the grenades were tossed, and I think Thich Thanh Van had asked me to take some messages to Saigon, and so I had left the school. But when I got to the school, I think at that point there were telephone lines and things. So the message had gone to whoever I was meeting that something had happened at the school. So they asked me to immediately go back. So I went back to the school, found out about the chaos there, and then that so many of the students had been hurt and they were at the hospital. So so I went to the hospital and to find out what could be done. And one of the doctors was a Japanese doctor. There were two Japanese doctors that I had come across while I was there, and they were volunteers also. But one of the doctors was Japanese, and he immediately told me that there was not enough blood for transfusions because there was so much loss of blood by the students. So, so I said, well, I'm a type O, so is there any way, you can use my blood? And he said, of course, immediately. So then, there was blood drawn so that, they could use it. And Go Hung was one of them who had lost so much blood, so they could not save her leg, so they had to amputate one of her legs. But she did recover, and who knows? I mean, what good the my blood, but Hung's parents felt that she was saved by the blood that I had donated. So they were very, very gracious and kind, and eventually when she recovered, they gave me this bracelet as gratitude for that. So I've been wearing it since then, yes. So, and I saw her, oh yes, there was a Japanese doctor who had done a lot of surgery on the Hiroshima victims. He lived in Hiroshima, and then when he heard about Vietnam, he was donating his time and effort also to bring injured people from Vietnam to his clinic in Hiroshima. And Hung was one of them who got to go to Dr. Harada's clinic. So she was in Japan for a while being treated by him. So, but I don't know where she is now, and I've lost touch. So it would be nice to know where she is and what she's doing. But
so when before I was able to get in contact with you, I spoke with Sister Dao Ngiem, who is the assistant to Chi Fung, to Sister Chan Khong. And I said, we're trying to, can Sister Chan Khong say anything about Masako? And then when she asked Sister Chan Khong, and Sister Chan Khong talked long, and she said, Sister Chan Khong told me many love stories about Masako. So apparently many young men fell in love with you, according to Sister Chan Khong, and because they thought that you were Viet Kieu, that you were you had Vietnamese, and you had an accent from America. Anyway, it's very, very funny. Our experience nowadays, many times when we ask Suko about the past, she always remembers the love stories. But I had a question. I mean, I think you've answered it a little bit in the story about the four of you coming to Vietnam, and then because you were Asian, so it was easy for you to become part. Yes. But I think even the fact of us finding out about you and what you'd done in the past, it strikes me you're incredibly discreet about these amazing things. So, I mean, some, and anyway, I just I kind of have a question. We had a question, how is it you're able to act so discreetly? And I see running messages here and there in Vietnam. I mean, you'd only been there a few months already, and you're already trusted so much. I just find that so fascinating.
Oh, well, I feel very lucky to have been, invited in as a friend, and and we had wonderful times, wonderful, really, really lovely. Yes.
Maybe at a personal level, how did you were born during World War II?
Yes.
And you're from Hiroshima, is that correct?
No.
No.
My family is from Tokyo.
Oh, it's from Tokyo. Okay.
Right, and but my grandfather had become a Christian, and he had met some Quakers who had gone to China. So when my father was sent by the bank, my grandfather was a banker, had taken his family all over the world, wherever he was, the bank sent him. So all of my mother and her siblings all spoke English because they grew up abroad. And then because I was born in China, in Shanghai, because my father was a banker in Shanghai. And that's when they became Quakers in China.
So this was during the Japanese
Yes, the
colonial...
Japanese occupation, yes. So I was born in 1943, and the Japanese had been in China from 39 to 45, I think. And so, yes.
Mm-hmm. How did the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki affect you were a few years old, and then,
yes.
Do you have memories, or is it more
I don't have memories of the bombing, but I do remember when the Americans kept testing bombs in the Bikini Atoll and other places, even after Hiroshima, I think. And so the earliest memory I have is in 48 or 49, when some ash from the testing fell on Japan and fell on fishing boats in the Pacific. And there were some Japanese fishing boats that really had the ashes just fall on them, and many of them were affected radioactively by that. And so I remember my father receiving a phone call from a friend and being very concerned about that. And that's when I first became aware of the atomic testing, I think, is the way. And so we would, I think he was told, do not eat the fish that comes in for a while anyway. It's not safe to eat the fish. So, but.
And later you became, as part of your peace activism, it also was in, I think we had found somewhere on a website that you had been involved with a group about peace and with regard to the atomic bomb, or to...
My activity was mainly the anti-Vietnam War activity. My parents, of course, were involved with the peace activities of the Quakers for a long, long time. So it could be that the name, my mother's name is Masako Yamanouchi, so it could be that her name was... yes.
She is also Masako, or?
No, I'm Masako, but she's Taeko.
Taeko, okay.
Yeah.
Maybe it was that,
yeah. And she worked a long, long time for the American Friends Service Committee, so yes, so could be the mistake.
So maybe we go to meeting Thai in Hong Kong for the first time.
Yes.
Could you tell us a little bit about that experience?
Yes. I was lucky enough to be able to go to Hong Kong to meet Thai through some sort of message that came that there was the copy machine, was it the copy machine? Yeah. Yes. And somebody needed to bring the copy machine back, and because I had my, Japanese passport and I could freely go out and come back in, they sent me to Hong Kong, which was wonderful because I got to meet Thich Nhat for the first time. I met him and stayed in the same apartment, and so we spent 2 or 3 days, and I was able to really talk to him and just be with him, and it was wonderful. And I think I saw that he was feeling a little bit vulnerable and lonely, and I'm sure he longed to go back to Vietnam but couldn't, and was by himself in Hong Kong at that time. So it was, I hope I was able to cheer him up a little bit by being there and having, being somebody who is totally ignorant. He was able to guide me. And I do have a big impression, and that was, we went to a shopping mall somewhere in Hong Kong, and it was quite crowded, but we were, when we talked, it seemed as though nobody else was there. But we were talking, and I told Thich Nhat Hanh, I said, I don't think I understand fully about Buddhism. My mother, of course, had, met with many Zen monks, and I knew about Buddhism, but I told him, I don't think I really know what Buddhism is. And he said, oh, Masako, I'll just explain Buddhism. You'll understand Buddhism very, very easily. So we were in this crowded mall, but it was a very colorful mall, and the lights kept going, and it was very colorful. Some dark, some, and he said, look up at that ceiling, and you can see the lights moving and the colors moving. And he said, Buddhism is like that. There's nothing set about Buddhism. You can look at the dark areas as evil, not very good. The light areas as good, and you can see that it's constantly moving. So Buddhism is the act of trying to increase the positive, the light, and that's all it is. It's really our hearts trying to increase the good, that there's nothing set in stone. And, when he was explaining that and I was seeing the colors, I felt as though I really, really understood exactly what he meant. So I feel very grateful that he shared that with me. I'm sure, in a way, it was very simplistic, but for me, that was very important that he explained it that way. And I think Thai is so, I think that was another thing I sensed about Thich Nhat Hanh, is that he knew who he was talking to, he knew what the moment was, so he could adapt his teaching to that moment, to that person. So with me, that was the way he taught me. I'm sure he might have said different things to different people, but that was what he taught me. Maybe because I'm very simplistic, but I felt very grateful that he took the time and he was kind and he just really allowed me to understand.
Thank you for that. So, I'm just curious. I know that after that, Thich could not stay longer in Hong Kong, and Thich went to Japan. I think he stayed a little while in Tokyo.
I think so. I'm afraid I don't know very much
right.
about that.
Yeah. So the last time was the only time you met him was there in Hong Kong.
In Hong Kong, that's right.
I think you've. I mean, we sent the questions ahead of time, so you seem to have answered many of them without me asking.
It was actually quite useful for me to think about my life. You know, life goes on, so, you know, I've married, had children, and then now I have grandchildren, and you know, it's as busy as ever. I've retired from teaching. For 27 years I was a teacher, but I've retired and you know, continue to be active in my own way. But it was good of you to contact me and send me these questions, because I had not thought about them in quite a while, so it was a good way for me to refresh my memories.
So you said the last time you saw Chi Fung was in 1969 when you left Saigon?
Yes.
So are there any other stories you'd like to tell about Chi Fung?
Chi Fung was really a force, really. She was, I think, so intelligent and just knew what her mission was, what her work was, and what was necessary at the time. And then also she was so wonderful to help me and guide me. So I was with her, you know, in and out many, many times, but always she was very clear and in what was necessary, and also very, very kind. And she had a good friend called Ji Nguyen, and so both of them, Fung and then Ji Nguyen, also relied on Fung a great deal. So yes, Ji Nguyen had a birth defect on her face and over her eyes, and was a little more hesitant because of that, but such a lovely person also. And then she would help Ji Fung in all the things that Fung was too busy to do. So it was really wonderful to see, yes.
Yeah, sometimes we wonder when she has time to sleep, because she she
yes.
works so much. Yeah. But really, you asked me at lunch what happened to the SYSS. Well, I think it became Plum Village. So a lot of the ways that you're describing
yes.
the atmosphere in the School of Youth for Social Service in Vietnam,
yes.
that became the energy of Plum Village and all of the monastics.
Oh, I see,
because,
yes.
The change was that Thai now ordained us, but it continued with the engaged Buddhism and engaged presence. In fact, we're hoping here to have a training program. It's very much inspired by the SYSS for young people here in the U.S. who can, live here, practice here, and engage in the community and helping people. And so, listening to you talk about the atmosphere at that time is very, very helpful and inspiring.
Right. I really think that the students were just so strong with love. I think going into the villages with them, I was lucky enough to go to the villages with them, and you know, and they just were so wonderful in the way they went about visiting the villagers, and always I came away with this strong feeling of how much love they had and how strong that love was. You know, not love in the American, the English word love, but it just came from deep inside their hearts. And I feel very lucky to have been a part of that and to learn from that, you know, so, yes.
So I see you brought a gift from Thai for us here.
When I was in Hong Kong, he wrote me a poem, and it's in Vietnamese, but it's in Vietnamese, and so I don't think I think he might have read it and, you know, told me about it at that time, but I didn't have a chance to write it in English. So if anybody can read it and translate it for us, it would be wonderful.
I think Sister Kidneum is smiling over there. Maybe we before you leave, we'll take a picture of it so that we can get a translation done. Yeah, because I think except for you in Thai, no one has ever seen this poem.
No, I don't think.
Yes. It's wonderful. Okay. So you talked about how your family got involved with Quakerism and this history of Christianity in your family, and so I wonder how has that played out in your life going forward from this experience?
I have to say that my mother was a very wonderful person. My father passed away in '58, shortly after we came back from China. So that's another story in itself, because when we were in China, my father decided to leave the bank that he had been working at to do some work inspired by the Quakers, and to feeling that the Japanese had done so much harm to the relationship between Japan and the Chinese. So he wanted, as one individual, to do something to make up for the damage that had been done. And but as one individual, he had some friends, Chinese friends, but working, you know, after he left the bank was really not very realistic. And the history of China is that in 1949, the communists took over, and there were waves of, you know, the government loosening, tightening, their grip on, but shortly after they took over, there was a Korean War, so the government was involved in aiding North Korea, so they were very busy. But after the Korean War was over, then they came back, and then they had the whole huge country to govern, and Shanghai had been known as a sin city. You know, it was terrible. But they just cleaned up the city. As a child, I remember seeing beggars, beggars my age. And, you know, as a child, when you see beggars of your own age, it's really a very frightful thing. Well, after the communists came, the streets became clean. There were no beggars. It was just an amazing change. However, as time went on, there was a tightening and loosening, tightening, loosening. What I mean is, when the communists came, in 1949, all the rich people fled China. They went to Hong Kong, they went to the States, they went to Europe, Australia. But the people who owned large corporations or big factories, the middle managers were the ones who didn't have enough money to leave the country. So they were the ones who were left. So in 1952, the workers of those big factories started, the government said, well, do you know of any things that were done to you that was wrong? And so the workers started accusing, of course they accused the company owners, but they were gone. So then they accused the middle managers. And so the middle managers were the ones who were called in and questioned and to confess, their sins, because the government already had written down all the complaints by the workers. And so at a certain point, it was a movement, and we heard the paddy wagons, arresting many, many of the middle managers. And we were told as children not to walk under tall buildings because there were people committing suicide, jumping out of tall buildings and things like that. And then as things went on, they also started looking at all the foreign community and saying, who are these foreigners left in China? What are they doing? What were they doing? And so, and then of course, those people who were quite wealthy, Chinese who are still left, were pulled in for questioning. And one of my father's good friends was called in for questioning. So my father said, in 1953, late 52, my father said, my friend, Mr. Lee, was taken in for questioning. Because I'm his friend, I'll probably be called in for questioning as well. So early January of 53, my father left to go to Mr. Lee's house to return some books to his wife, because Mr. Lee had not returned yet, returned some borrowed books that they had study sessions, and then never came back. So my father was arrested, and for 3.5 years he was incarcerated by the communist government. And so during those 3.5 years, when we didn't have a father, my mother, as I started to say, being a very, very wonderful person, she was so cheerful. We had very little to live on. My grandfather would send some money as remittance, but we never knew when that would come. But she was always, with the very little that we had, never made me feel as though we were very deprived, and never felt sad or anything. And I think she kept up the cheerfulness. And she says, she was blessed to have 3 children who kept her going, But she was always this very, very strong person and very cheerful person. And so when I left to go to college and when I went to Vietnam, she was always all her brothers and siblings would say, what are you doing letting this girl go by herself to, college or do this? And she would say, well, this is her life and she wants to do it. If she has a way to do it, then, I think it's, she needs to do it. And so I always knew that I had her faith and her love, trust and love in me. So I couldn't do anything, well, I've done many bad things in my life, but I couldn't do anything super, super bad because I knew that I had my mother's love and trust. So I think that's what really kept me going, and that she always had that faith and love and trust. And I think the same kind of love that is so fundamental for the school, the young people, it's really that strength, I think, that keeps us going, you know, and that's so important in life. So I feel very fortunate to have been, you know, blessed with a wonderful mother, blessed with wonderful friends, and the experiences that I've had. Yes, yes. So.
Well, thank you so much for taking so much time. It's already been an hour and 20 minutes. I just, maybe we just close with one more question, which was, I mean, how aware have you been of, you know, I mean, Thai ended up becoming really a world teacher and having a massive influence, especially in the thousands and until his stroke in 2014. And I'm curious because you haven't been to Plum Village, this is your first time here to Deer Park. How aware have you been of the continuation of Thai's career of teaching?
Oh, I have followed, you know, news about Thai over the years. I myself, when after my work in Vietnam, and then after I left and went for months, for almost a year, speaking against the war, sponsored by the Fellowship of Reconciliation. And then I was doing teaching, you know, tutoring in English, and then participating in the anti-war movements in Tokyo. And then I went to northern Japan to help out an anti-war coffee shop and things like that. And that's where actually I met my husband, who was GI, an American GI on the base of the Air Force Base. And so, you know, who knew? And everybody teases me, and I would say myself, you know, how would I end up, you know, marrying a GI when I was so much against the American military? That's life for you. But after marrying him, you know, and I had gone to college, but he had not. He had come from a background in Chicago, not very well-to-do. His very intelligent family, but very mother left to care for 4 boys, you know, on her own and things like that. So he really grew up not with very much. And so he started out, and then my mother being a Quaker, and we had very little. So when we started out our lives, we had very little. But we were happy, and then my first thing was, he had not had a college education, so it's important for him to have a college education. So I persuaded him to leave the Air Force and go to college. And he was a photographer in the Air Force, by the way. He was photographing all of us doing the snake dance outside the military base, the anti-war snake dance, black helmet, and he was photographing. And then came to the anti-war coffee shop, you know, afterwards to see what this was all about. But so I persuaded him to leave the Air Force. After 10 years, he went to RIT, which is the top school for photography in the U.S. in Rochester, New York. Ended up working for Kodak. And then, you know, we brought about 3 children. But we had very little to live on. He didn't have anything. My mother was Quaker, and, you know, we didn't have anything. I have very well-to-do relatives, but that's nothing, you know. We just had nothing. So it was a struggle on his GI Bill payment and things like that to go to college. And you know, I was farming, planting vegetables, and baking my own bread, making my own tofu and things like that. It was a good life though. I mean, we called ourselves poor, but really we felt very rich in our lives. And so it was a struggle. And then he got his job at Kodak, and things got better. But you know, the people who are born with families that, you know, I mean, even with a house that they give to their children, right? We had none of that. And so I identify with all the people who don't have that background of a silver spoon, you know, being born with a silver spoon in their mouths, you know, having nothing and somehow working hard to you know, make it. And so I feel very, very lucky that, you know, we were able to do that with lots of good friends. And my children, I have to say, have grown up to be wonderful parents, you know, have married, having wonderful spouses and children. So we are very, very blessed. But I feel that this is basically, you know, our parents, you know, who have given us this strength and my experiences. Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you so much for taking all this time today. Maybe, you know, in our tradition, we offer flowers instead of clapping, just to express our joy. And thank you for taking this time. It's
well, thank you for having me. I'm so sorry. I'm always a rambler, so. But if anybody can help me translate this would be wonderful.
So for coming today, we wanted to offer a little gift to you. So yeah, we have a few of Thai's books. So this is the new edition of Vietnam Lotus in a Sea of Fire, which just came out. And one of Thai's last books, which is called Zen and the Art of Saving the Planet around the climate crisis and how to respond with mindfulness. And then some tea from the Central Highlands of Vietnam. One of the sisters of her family produces this. And Terrence here has a farm which produces umeboshi plums. They're from Washington State, right? Yeah, it's Terrace in the orange shirt. And one more book, which is called Happy Teachers Change the World, because we heard you were a teacher, and it's Thai's teaching for schools to bring Plum Village practices of mindfulness into schools. So,
I have to say that I was teaching Japanese for many years, but my students always loved it when I went off. They would say, "We heard you were in Vietnam. Tell us a little bit about it." And then I would tell them small anecdotes of, you know, my experiences in Vietnam, and they loved it. They really loved it. So
well, we loved it too. So here, thank you so much. Yeah. So we'll finish with 3 sounds of the bell. We can come back to our breathing and just, hold the sharing in our heart and with gratitude.